Murderers are generally scary, but scariest among them is a subcategory that sends extra shivers down the spine: serial killer. Something about psychos who go about gratuitously piling up victims, one after another, has long horrified and titillated people in equal measure. From the Outback axe murderer to the jilted Russian noblewoman, who vented her murderous rage on hundreds of serfs, following are 20 fascinating things about some of history's worst serial killers. Number 20. Getting away with murder. Scholars do not know the exact number of people killed by Countess Bathory, but some estimates go as high 650 victims. Rumors of the goings-on at her castle eventually got out, and the Hungarian authorities conducted an investigation. In December 1610, the sadistic countess and 4 of her accomplices were arrested. Bathory's accomplices were tried, and 3 of them were convicted of murder and sundry crimes, and executed. Elizabeth was connected, however, so she got off light. The authorities reasoned that trying and executing a member of a prominent family like hers would cause too much of a public scandal and bring the aristocracy into disrepute, so she was quietly imprisoned in Kashtas Castle, Slovakia, until her death of natural causes in 1614. Number 19. The Black Arts Bandit. Medieval German outlaw Peter Nyers, died 1581, was a highwayman, black arts practitioner, and one of history's most prolific serial killers. Over a 15-year period, as he confessed after his arrest, Nyers murdered 544 people and cut the fetuses out of the wombs of 24 pregnant women. The fetuses were used as ingredients in black magic rituals, then consumed in cannibalistic acts. Nyers began his criminal career as a highwayman in Alsace, present-day France. He eventually headed a gang of bandits that numbered about 24 cutthroats. He also became a leading figure in a loose network of outlaws and highwayman gangs that joined forces on occasion to conduct major operations requiring large numbers of men. Nyers' criminal activities spanned a large territory that included western France, the Rhineland, and Bavaria in southern Germany. Number 18. A medieval monster. Peter Nyers set himself apart from other bandits. With his extreme bloodthirstiness and gratuitous cruelty, he was not content to simply rob his victims or even to simply kill them. Instead, Nyers enjoyed torturing those who fell into his hands, and got a kick out of murdering them in a variety of fiendishly inventive ways. He was captured in 1577, and under torture, confessed to 75 murders during the previous 11 years, however, before he managed to escape before his scheduled execution. Nyers returned to his criminal activities, and resumed them with even greater cruelty and bloodthirstiness. Indeed, the majority of his murders and depravities occurred in the 4 years following his escape. In the 11 years before his arrest, Nyers had murdered 75 people. Authorities estimated that he murdered an additional 569 people in the 4 years from 1577 to 1581, when he was arrested for a second and final time. Number 17. Going medieval on a monster. After his second arrest in 1581, Peter Nyers was taken to the Bavarian city of Neumarkt in der Oberpfalz for a public execution. The authorities went medieval on him, literally and figuratively, even for an era in which torture and gruesome executions were routine. Peter Nyers' execution, which commenced on September 16, 1581, stood out. Nyers underwent a 3-day ordeal. On the first day, torturers flayed his skin, then poured hot oil on his exposed muscles to slough off layers of flesh. On the second day, Nyers' feet were coated in grease, and his lower body was slowly grilled over a low fire. On the third day, his body was broken on the wheel, with dozens of blows that smashed his major bones to pieces. Finally, the executioners quartered him while still alive, by sawing his body into pieces, and was the end of this killer. Number 16. The Anti-Semitic Jew. Unlike the other monsters on this list, Stella Kubler-Isaacson, 1922 to 1994, did not personally kill her victims. Instead, she hunted them down and delivered them to the Nazis, who killed them. Born Stella Goldschlag, she was raised as the only child of an assimilated middle-class Jewish family in Berlin, and was treated like a princess by overprotective parents. Stella grew up financially comfortable, but not as rich as her schoolmates in a Jewish school that gnawed at her, and left her harboring resentments against her richer schoolmates. During World War II, Stella became infamous for collaborating with the Gestapo to track down and denounce other Jews hiding from the Nazis. Many of those denounced by her were her former schoolmates and their families, whom she repaid in spades for their crime of being richer than Stella's family. Number 15. Becoming a Jew catcher. During World War II, Stella Kubler secured false identity papers that listed her as a German Aryan. She was blonde and blue-eyed, so it worked for a while. However, Stella and her boyfriend were eventually denounced to the Gestapo by a Jew catcher, a Jew working for the Gestapo to find other Jews in hiding. To save their necks, her boyfriend and future husband offered the Nazis their services. The Gestapo put the couple to work as catchers, paying them 300 Reichsmarks for every Jew they turned in, and promising to spare Stella's parents so long as she kept producing. The duo had good instincts for hiding places. Having lived in hiding themselves, Stella was particularly effective because she knew many of Berlin's Jews from her years in a segregated Jewish school. Number 14. Going after fellow Jews with a will. Stella Kubler had not chosen to become a Jew catcher of her own free will. However, how she exercised what freedom of choice she had while working as a catcher was entirely within her control. She exercised that freedom of choice by pursuing hidden Jews with remarkable zeal. Even after the Jews she turned in were arrested and her task was over, Stella enthusiastically took part in beating, torturing, and humiliating the arrestees. Notwithstanding her zeal, the Nazis reneged on their promises to Stella and deported her parents to their death in an extermination camp. Her husband and his family were sent to Auschwitz in 1943. Despite that, Stella's enthusiasm for seeking out hidden Jews and denouncing them to the Gestapo did not wane. Betting on a German victory, she secured a promise from a high-ranking Gestapo official in 1944 that she would be declared an Aryan after the war. Number 13. Getting off light. By the time World War II ended, Stella Kubler had been responsible for the arrest, deportation, and subsequent murder of hundreds of Jews. She was a cold-blooded killer. Estimates of the total number of her victims ranged from a low of 600 to possibly as high as 3,000. Their numbers included many of her personal friends, former schoolmates and their families, and even some of her own relatives. Nonetheless, Stella got off light. Captured by the Soviets, she was tried and got a 10-year sentence. After her release, she moved to West Berlin, where she was tried by the West German authorities and sentenced to 10 years. However, she did not serve any time of that sentence. She then converted to Christianity and became a lifelong anti-Semite. In 1994, Stella Kubler committed suicide by jumping out the window of her Berlin apartment. Number 12. A royal serial killer. Korea's Crown Prince Sato, 1735–1762, was the son of King Yongjo and heir to the throne. He never got to inherit, and is best remembered today as a monstrous serial killer. Sato was the king's second son, but the first one had died in 1728. For years, the king's wives and concubines had given him only daughters, and he despaired of ever getting another male heir. When Sato was born in 1735, his arrival was met with widespread rejoicing. The infant was set up in his own palace with an army of maids, governesses, and servants. However, his father took little part in raising or supervising his upbringing, so Sato was spoiled rotten and grew up doing whatever he liked. On the few occasions when the king visited, he was highly irritable and grew angry at even trivial missteps by his son. Sato grew up oscillating between a great fear of his father and a desperate need to please him. Number 11. An intimidating father. Crown Prince Sato found it difficult to please his father. The king was not into displays of affection, and whenever the two met, Sato's father was more critical than affectionate. As a result, Sato grew up feeling unloved and resentful, later turning him into a killer. Between those daddy issues, perceived lack of affection, lack of fatherly supervision, indulgence and flattery by courtiers, and other deep-seated neuroses, something broke inside Sato and he grew up to become a monster. He was a troubled young man, given to extremely violent and erratic mood swings. One day, he would behave with such decorum, dignity, and probity, so as to be all that his father had ever wanted in a son and heir. The next, he would undergo a transformation and give free rein to violent outbursts, during which he would turn rapist and murderer. Historians are unsure what exactly ailed him, but he was clearly mentally unstable, and many today think that he was schizophrenic. Number 10. A monstrous prince. Alcohol was forbidden at court, but Prince Sato was nonetheless given to downing heroic amounts of wine and spirits. He became a raging alcoholic. When a depressive mood fell upon him, murdering servants brought Sato relief. On many a day, several dead bodies were carried out of the palace. He also enjoyed raping court ladies, and after murdering his concubine, he started harassing his own sister. As a result, He became widely feared throughout the kingdom as a serial rapist, serial killer, and all-around dangerous psychopath. Eventually, Sato's father had enough, and determined that he could not in good conscience inflict his criminally insane son upon the Korean people as their next king. On July 4, 1762, Sato was summoned by his father, who ceremonially struck the floor with a sword and declared the crown prince deposed. Taboos prohibited the outright execution of the prince, so the king had Sato placed inside a heavy wooden chest used for storing rice and locked him inside. There, the deposed prince was left to starve to death, and he perished 8 days later. Number 9. You did not want to accept a dinner invitation from this man. Karl Denke was born in 1860 into a wealthy farming family near Münsterberg, Silesia, Kingdom of Prussia, today's Zaibais, Poland. Little is known of his early life, other than that he ran away from home at age 12 and apprenticed himself to a gardener. As he grew up, he pursued a variety of professions, including farming after his father's death, when he used his share of the inheritance to buy a plot of land. Denke was not a good farmer, however, and it did not take long before working the fields reminded him why he had run away from home as a child, so he sold his land and bounced around a variety of occupations for a few years. He eventually bought a small house in Münsterberg and became an organ player in his local church. Few would have predicted he would go down in history as one of Germany's scariest serial killers and cannibals. Number 8. Papa Denke's secret. Karl Denke developed a reputation as a devout evangelical and became a well-liked and respected member of his community, a friendly avuncular figure, always kind and helpful to people. He was nicknamed Vater Denke, German for Papa Denke, by his admiring neighbors. His standing took a turn for the worse in 1924, when people discovered just who the real Papa Denke was. On December 21, 1924, a passerby heard cries for help coming from Denke's house. Rushing in, he encountered a young man staggering in a corridor and bleeding copiously from a head wound. Before collapsing on the floor, the victim blurted out that Papa Denke had attacked him with an axe. Police were called and Denke was arrested. A search of his house turned up identification papers for a dozen men, plus various items of male clothing whose size precluded them from belonging to Denke. Number 7. Pickled long pig. What most struck police about Karl Denke's house was the kitchen. There they found 2 large tubs containing meat pickling in brine. The meat was attached to human bones, and by tallying the various bits, investigators estimated that Papa Denke had been in the process of pickling up to 30 victims. Police also found a notebook, in which Denke had listed the names of many more victims, with the dates of their murders going back to 1921, plus the weight of their pickled bodies. Investigators did not get the opportunity to grill Denke about his motives. During his first night in prison, he used a handkerchief to hang himself in his cell. However, evidence gathered revealed that he ate his victims. He also disposed of their meat by feeding it to guests, jarring it and selling it as pickled pork, or giving jars of the pickled pork to his neighbors as gifts. Number 6. The real-life monster behind the fairy tale. The inspiration behind Bluebeard, Gilles de Montmorency Laval, Baron de Rice, better known to history as Gilles de Rice, 1404 to 1440, was an aristocrat from Brittany. De Rice was a respected knight and a national hero who rose to prominence as Joan of Arc's chief captain and right-hand man. Then his true nature was revealed, and his celebrated career was cut short, along with his head, when it was discovered that, away from the limelight, he was an outright monster. The Rice family, the House of Montmorency, was one of the oldest, most respected and most distinguished aristocratic families in France. From an early age, de Rice seemed to live up to the high expectations of a scion of such an illustrious clan. By age 15, he had distinguished himself militarily during a series of wars of succession that racked the Duchy of Brittany. He distinguished himself even more in Anjou, fighting for its duchess against the English in 1427. Number 5. The rise before the fall. When Joan of Arc emerged in 1429 to challenge the English, Gilles de Rice was one of France's most celebrated military men. Despite his youth, he was assigned to guard the Maid of Orleans, and fought in several battles at her side. De Rice particularly distinguished himself in her greatest victory, the lifting of the English siege of Orleans. He then accompanied her to Reims for the coronation of King Charles VII, who made Gilles de Rice Marshal of France, a distinction awarded to generals for exceptional achievements. De Rice inherited significant estates from both his father and maternal grandfather. He married a rich heiress, which match brought him even more extensive holdings, and made him one of France's greatest magnates. He retired from the military in 1434, but it soon emerged that he was not as good managing money as he was at managing men in battle. It did not take de Rijs long to dissipate his fabulous wealth, with a lavish lifestyle that rivaled that of the king. Number 4. Alchemy, Satanism and serial killing. Within a year of de Rijs' retirement, he lost most of his lands, and his family secured from the king a decree forbidding him from mortgaging what was left. To raise more cash, de Rijs turned to alchemy, hoping to figure out a way to turn base metals into gold. He also turned to Satanism, hoping to gain knowledge, power and riches by summoning the devil. Another thing he turned to was the serial rape, torture and murder of children. In 1440, an increasingly erratic de Rijs got into a dispute with local church figures, and things escalated until he ended up kidnapping a priest. That triggered an ecclesiastical investigation of Gilles, which unearthed some horrific stuff. It turned out that the once celebrated national hero had been murdering children, mostly boys, but also the occasional girl by the hundreds. Number 3. An aristocratic sicko. The killer, Gilles de Rijs' modus operandi was to lure children from peasant or lower-class families to his castle with gifts, such as candy, toys, or clothing. He would initially put them at their ease, feed and pamper them, before leading them to a bedroom. There de Rijs and his accomplices would seize their victims. As he confessed in his subsequent trial, de Rijs got a sadistic kick out of watching the children's fear when he explained what was in store for them. What was in store was not good. Suffice it to say that it involved torture and sodomy, and ended with the child's murder, usually via decapitation. The victims and their clothing would then be burned in the fireplace, and their ashes dumped in a moat. After de Rijs confessed to his crimes, he and his accomplices were condemned to death. He was executed on October 26, 1440, by burning and hanging simultaneously. His infamy inspired the fairy tale of Bluebeard, about a wealthy serial wife killer. Number 2. Ancient China's serial killing royal. Ancient China's Prince Liu Pengli was a member of the ruling Han dynasty. He was also the first serial killer in recorded history. In 144 BC, Emperor Jing, Liu Pengli's cousin, appointed him king of the city of Jirdong and the surrounding district. That was bad news for the good people of Jirdong, who would be ruled by Pengli for the next 23 years. The killer, Pengli, preyed upon his subjects, killing them for kicks and giggles. He probably would have liked the Ramsay Bolton character from Game of Thrones, because like that fictitious character, Pengli enjoyed hunted human beings for sport. At least 100 people were murdered by Pengli for his amusement, and the true number of his victims was probably higher. His reign of psychotic terror lasted for over 2 decades, during which his subjects were too scared to come out of their homes at night. It only came to an end after one of Pengli's victims finally screwed up the courage to travel to the imperial capital, where he complained to the emperor. Number 1. Getting away light. Throughout most of history, justice has often been illusory and usually unequal, which explains why Prince Pengli got off light. He was not executed, but was simply stripped of his rank and banished, as described by Han historian Sima Qian. Liu Pengli was arrogant and cruel, and paid no attention to the etiquette demanded between ruler and subject. In the evenings he used to go out on marauding expeditions, with 20 or 30 slaves or young men, who were in hiding from the law, murdering people and seizing their belongings for sheer sport. When the affair came to light, it was found he had murdered at least 100 or more persons. Everyone in the kingdom knew about his ways, so that the people were afraid to venture out of their houses at night. The son of one of his victims finally sent a report to the Han emperor, and the Han officials requested that he be executed. The emperor could not bear to carry out their recommendation, but made him a commoner and banished him to Shangyang,